Good evening, you're watching BBC Newsline. The death of a man in a Scrambler bike crash is being investigated by the police. Ryan Phillips was 27 and from the Lisburn area. He was involved in a collision with another bike on a pathway near Sprucefield yesterday evening. Our reporter Kevin Sharkey has been to the scene.
The scene of the crash on the Lagan towpath. Ryan Phillips, who died, was riding one of the Scramblers. An 18-year-old youth who was riding the other bike was injured. The tragedy happened just a short distance from an off-road track beside local farmland. The police are now trying to find out what caused the crash. This is a narrow country lane. It runs from the park and ride facility, which is out of view from here. The lane is very popular with walkers and with cyclists and is also used as farm access. The exact circumstances of what happened last night are still being investigated, but what is known, it was dark at the time and there would have been a lot of noise from passing traffic on the M1 motorway, which is just on the other side of these bushes. Neighbours arrived at the scene of the crash as the police were beginning their investigations.
It really is heartbreaking. Young fellas at such a young age, and this tragedy has happened. The police were on scene and the lane was closed off. Families were arriving and people were obviously grief-stricken, and it was a terrible scene, really.
Last summer, the police launched an awareness campaign about the use of scramblers in public areas. It followed the death of Valerie Armstrong, a mother of 3, who was struck by a scrambler in Coleraine Glen Forest Park in West Belfast. Also last year, 13-year-old Daniel Sheridan died in a motorbike accident at a motocross track near McGilligan. And a 9-year-old boy was hit by a scrambler at Mosley Pavilion in Newtonabbey. Following last night's tragedy, the police have issued an appeal for information from anyone who was close to the scene of the crash. Kevin Sharkey, BBC Newsline in Lisburn.
Tributes have been paid to a 22-year-old Belfast man who died at the weekend, almost a fortnight after an incident in the city centre. Conan Anderson was injured during a night out, and afterwards a 27-year-old man was arrested in North Belfast on suspicion of grievous bodily harm. He was later released on bail. The police are now treating the death as murder and have appealed for witnesses to contact them. The victim had been a sports coach and involved in cross-community work.
The community is in shock. You know, a young lad going out for a drink and then his family waking up to this devastating news. It's just, there's no words to describe what they're going through. Conan was a fantastic young lad. As I said before, you know, he offered so much to this community. He just dedicated his life to coaching young people. The kids will not forget him, you know, the impact, especially kids at that young age, would look up to somebody like Conan as a role model, and that he was.
The police are investigating a gun attack in Coleraine last night when a mother and son were wounded. A masked gunman opened fire in their home in James's Street. The woman in her 50s and her son, who's in his 20s, suffered leg injuries. The DUP leader claims winning the Assembly election would give Sinn Féin a hugely significant worldwide propaganda boost. Launching her party's manifesto, Arlene Foster said such a result would be a disaster for unionism and for Northern Ireland, and stopping Sinn Féin was the platform on which the DUP would be seeking a mandate. Here's our political correspondent, Gareth Gordon.
This hotel will forever be associated with a failed talks process led by the US diplomat Richard Haas. Just over 3 years later, the DUP was back to launch its manifesto for an election which will be followed by yet more talks. The DUP says it's fighting this election in the worst possible circumstances, but its main message is clear, and it's one we've heard before: stop Sinn Féin. The party leader said she was suffering.
I have been struck down with the cold/man flu. It's very, very bad.
But she was able to list 10 reasons to give to people on the doorsteps about why it would matter if Sinn Féin wins the election.
It would give Gerry Adams and Sinn Féin a hugely significant worldwide propaganda boost just months after nationalism's worst election since 1993, and would undermine the unionist confidence which is being rebuilt after so many years in decline. And finally, of course, it would, of course, give Sinn Féin the right to nominate a First Minister. But our job, your job, is to make sure that that does not happen.
Then she turned to the Ulster Unionists.
And that's why Colleagues, it is inexplicable, sad and shameful that Mike Nesbitt would urge people to transfer to the SDLP ahead of other unionists.
When the leader's speech was over, the media was not allowed to ask questions. The 8-page document is not really a manifesto at all, but an addendum to reflect developments since the last election in May. It lists again the DUP's main priorities from then: prioritising spending on the health service, creating more jobs and increasing incomes, protecting family budgets, raising standards in education for everyone, and investing in infrastructure. The DUP claims it goes into the election neck and neck with Sinn Féin. Its goal is to be in front by Thursday week. Gareth Gordon, BBC Newsline.
An environmentalist has described the route of a new dual carriageway near a protected wetland as the most expensive and destructive option that could have been chosen. Chris Murphy has gone to court to stop work on a section of the A6 at Toome Bridge. Our agriculture and environment correspondent Conor McCauley reports.
Chris Murphy, helped by his wife Doris, represented himself in court. He's not opposing the dualling of the A6, just the route chosen for it. He says it's too close to an important protected wetland north of Toome Bridge. The A6 is a key transport corridor. At rush hour, it's choked with traffic. It needs upgrading, but not along this route, say environmentalists. Mr Murphy told the court that Lough Beg was one of the most important wetlands in these islands, whose importance as a home for migratory birds could not be overstated. Disrupting it in any way, he said, was like cutting the corner off a Rembrandt. At the heart of this case is a claim that the environmental surveys underpinning the decision to push ahead with the road were a decade out of date. Chris Murphy said the Department of Infrastructure officials had been told they weren't complying with the rules under EU laws which protect this place, but they'd ploughed on recklessly. A new assessment ought to have been carried out, one that was up to date and gave good information on the impact of the project on populations of overwintering swans which use these fields. And he said, picking the line closest to the loch, through a landscape celebrated by poet Seamus Heaney, was the most expensive and most destructive option, both culturally and environmentally. The department will get its say tomorrow. Conor McCauley, BBC Newsline, at Belfast High Court.
A County Armagh man has been fined several £1,000s for destroying 30 acres of habitat within a protected zone. Inspectors from the Environment Agency visited a site owned by Derek Johnston from Carrick-a-Sticken Road in Forkhill and saw areas being burned and sprayed and vegetation being removed with machinery. The land is within the Slieve Gullion area of special scientific interest and area of conservation, and it is an offence to carry out such work there without notification or permission. Jeff Maskell has the latest weather forecast.
Hello, good evening. Well, we had quite a spring-like feel to our weather this afternoon, with temperatures up above 14 degrees in some spots in the sunshine. Overnight tonight, though, we've got a weather front that will just introduce a little bit of cloud and maybe some rain across the southern half of Northern Ireland. Clearer skies across the north coast mean a bit cooler overnight there. So tomorrow will start off dry, but it's not going to last. As we go through the day, that weather front will again return north, but this time it'll bring some much heavier and more persistent rain as we go through the day. So while the mid-morning is dry, it doesn't take long for that rain to start to push in and spread to all parts. Temperature's still quite mild, up in double figures, 11 or 12 degrees. But you can see what a different day we're having across different parts of the UK. Some quite heavy rain across the west coast of Scotland, much drier and brighter across southeast England. And it is going to be quite a varied week of weather. While we start off on this mild note, by the time we get to Thursday and Friday, it could be cold enough for a chance of some hill snow. So overnight that rain will continue Tuesday into Wednesday. Behind it we start to introduce some of that cooler air. So just look at what happens to our temperatures. Highs of 8 or 9 degrees on Wednesday, and that's because this area of cold air marked in blue is starting to become much more dominant by the end of this week. And on Thursday morning, as an area of low pressure comes through, that could be cold enough just to see a little bit of hill snow over the highest ground. So a mild start to the week, but those temperatures are going downhill.
Our next local news is at 6:25 in the morning here on BBC One. But from me, good night.